My friends, something very interesting is happening around the Philadelphia Eagles right now, and the deeper you look into everything that's unfolding inside the organization, the more it feels like this team is quietly building something even more dangerous for the 2026 season. Not just on the field, but throughout the entire structure of the franchise. Front office changes, roster additions, international development players, pass rush upgrades, and even massive updates around Jalen Carter are all starting to connect together into one bigger picture. One of the biggest talking points right now is the growing belief that the Eagles may have had one of the strongest off seasons among contenders. And honestly, when you start breaking down every move, it's not hard to understand why people around the league are beginning to say that. The roster already had elite level talent, but instead of standing still, Howie Roseman kept attacking weaknesses and adding more competition everywhere. The defensive side of the football especially feels like it could become terrifying. The trade for Jonathan Greenard continues to generate massive excitement because this is not just another edge rusher being plugged into the system. Everything coming out about him paints the picture of a complete defensive player that fits perfectly into Vic Fangio's defense. People close to Greenard describe him as one of the most respected professionals in football, the type of player other players admire because of how seriously he approaches the game. And when you look at the actual football side of it, the fit becomes even more dangerous. Unlike Bryce Huff last season, Greenard brings versatility. He can defend the run, set the edge, drop into coverage, rush with speed, rush with power, and create confusion for quarterbacks. That matters in Fangio's scheme because the Eagles aren't just looking for pure pass rush specialists anymore. They want complete defenders who can disguise looks and attack offenses from multiple angles. And now imagine adding that version of Greenard next to a healthier Jalen Carter. That's where things become scary for the rest of the league. According to people close to Carter, he has transformed his body this offseason and is reportedly in the best shape of his life. Eagles fans saw flashes of dominance from him last season, even while he was clearly dealing with physical limitations late in the year. There were moments where you could see the explosiveness disappear because his body simply wasn't responding the same way anymore. But now the reports coming out suggest that Carter has regained strength, flexibility, and added serious muscle during the off-season workouts. And that should terrify offensive lines, because if Jalen Carter returns fully healthy while continuing to develop technically, the Eagles may once again have one of the most disruptive interior defensive linemen in football, especially now that he has extra motivation with future contract discussions eventually approaching. The expectation internally feels very clear. Carter is preparing to dominate, but the Eagles are not only thinking about proven stars, they are also continuing to invest heavily in raw upside and long-term development, and that's where the international player additions become one of the most fascinating stories of the entire offseason. The name that has completely exploded across social media is UR Bernard, and honestly, the stories coming out about him sound almost unreal. People involved with his development describe him as a freak athlete, unlike almost anything they've seen before. One coach even said he looks like he was made in a lab. At over 300 pounds, Bernard reportedly tested at ridiculous levels athletically, including jumping 38 inches vertically while wearing only socks because they literally did not have shoes large enough for him at one evaluation event. He wears a size 18.5 shoe. Think about how insane that is. But what's making Eagles fans even more emotional about Bernard's story is the mentality behind everything. According to people who worked directly with him, Bernard repeatedly said one thing during the process. He was determined to change his family's life forever and refused to go back to the situation he came from in Nigeria. The average yearly income in his village was reportedly around $1,000 a year. His father passed away recently, and that pain became fuel for him to chase this opportunity with everything he had. And when you hear the details about how he trained before arriving in the United States, it almost sounds impossible. While American prospects have advanced equipment and professional facilities, Bernard was in Nigeria hitting trees with his bare hands to practice defensive line strikes because he didn't have access to sleds or training pads. That level of hunger is impossible to fake. The Eagles clearly fell in love with not only the physical traits, but the mentality behind the player. This feels very similar to the type of gamble the organization once made with Jordan Mailata, a massive athlete, limited football background, but unbelievable work ethic and upside. And now Bernard enters a perfect environment to develop because he won't be alone during the transition. The Eagles also brought in Joshua Iweru, another international player with an athletic background that has coached coaches extremely intrigued. What makes this even more interesting is that the organization intentionally paired these players together so they can learn and grow side by side while adapting to football and life in America at the same time. Jordan Mailata has reportedly already spent significant time helping both players understand offensive concepts and football fundamentals. That mentorship could become incredibly valuable. Meanwhile, the Eagles are also strengthening the organization internally behind the scenes. Adam Berry was promoted to assistant general manager, showing just how highly the franchise thinks of him after his rapid rise within the front office. Joe Douglas also received a major personnel role, giving Philadelphia another experienced football mind involved in roster construction and evaluation. When you combine all of this together, the Eagles don't look like a team satisfied with simply staying competitive. They look like an organization aggressively preparing for another championship window while also building for the future at the same time. And maybe the most dangerous part of all this is that the Eagles are entering the season with one of the easiest projected schedules in the NFC East, according to early analytics projections. Of course, projections don't guarantee anything, but if this roster stays healthy and the defensive line reaches its ceiling, Philadelphia could become one of the most complete teams in football again. So now the big question becomes this: if Jonathan Greenard and a fully healthy Jalen Carter both dominate at the same time, could this Eagles defensive front become even more dangerous than fans are expecting right now? The more you listen to the people working around this Eagles defensive line, the more it feels like the organization truly believes they are building something special up front again. Not just good, not just solid, potentially overwhelming. And that confidence is showing everywhere right now, especially in the way people inside football circles are talking about the pass rush room that Vic Fangio is putting together. One thing that stood out from the conversation surrounding Jonathan Greenard is how consistently people describe him as a complete player instead of just a sack artist. That distinction matters because Fangio's system demands discipline, intelligence, and versatility from edge rushers. The Eagles are clearly moving away from relying on one-dimensional pass rushers and instead focusing on players who can stay on the field in every situation without becoming liabilities. Greenard fits that perfectly. The reports coming from people who trained him paint the picture of someone who can rush with power, explode with speed, hold up against the run, and even comfortably drop into coverage when needed. That creates so many possibilities for Fangio because now quarterbacks can't immediately identify where pressure is coming from before the snap. And once offenses start hesitating for even half a second against a defensive line featuring Greenard, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, and the rest of that rotation, things can get ugly fast. What's even more exciting for Eagles fans is hearing how respected Greenard is behind the scenes. Coaches and trainers repeatedly describe him as a pro's pro, the type of player younger defenders naturally gravitate toward because of his work ethic and preparation. That matters more than people realize because this Eagles roster is filled with young defensive talent still developing. Having veterans who know how to prepare at an elite level helps accelerate everybody else around them. And the Eagles clearly believe the environment inside that defensive room is becoming one of the team's biggest strengths. That's part of why the Jalen Carter updates are generating so much attention. Last season, even while dealing with physical issues, Carter still flashed moments where he looked unblockable. There were games where offensive linemen simply could not handle his first step or raw power. But there were also stretches late in the year where his conditioning and overall health became noticeable concerns. Now, according to the people closest to him, that version of Carter may already be gone. The offseason transformation sounds dramatic. Reports say Carter attacked his conditioning, rebuilt his strength, improved flexibility, and added muscle while getting his body back to full health. The scary part is imagining what happens if a healthier Carter finally plays an entire season at full explosiveness. Because physically, there may not be many defensive tackles in football capable of matching what he can do at his absolute peak. And internally, the motivation could not be higher. There's growing belief that Carter eventually wants to become one of the highest paid defensive players in football. And honestly, if he reaches the ceiling many believe he has, that conversation won't sound crazy at all. Players with his combination of size, athleticism, and disruptive ability are rare. Very rare. But while most fans are understandably focused on the stars, one of the most fascinating developments this offseason is still the international international player program additions. The stories surrounding War Bernard continue sounding almost unbelievable the more details emerge. One thing that became very clear is that the Eagles were not simply drafting an athletic project for publicity or headlines. The people who evaluated Bernard genuinely believe he possesses uncommon physical tools combined with an extreme level of determination, and honestly, some of the details about his development process are hard to ignore. Imagine being a player with almost no football background compared to American prospects, then still managing to physically outperform many of them during evaluations. Bernard reportedly dominated testing numbers despite still being extremely raw technically. Coaches described him as someone whose body transformed rapidly within just a few months because of how intensely he attacked training once he realized the NFL opportunity was real. That urgency became one of the defining parts of his story. The people around him said Bernard understood this was more than football. This was about changing the future for his family forever. That desperation created an obsession with improving, and apparently it showed every single day during training sessions. Coaches repeatedly mentioned how willing he was to work, learn, and push himself physically. And maybe the wildest part of all is realizing how undeveloped he still is as a football player. That means the Eagles are betting that once professional coaching, NFL nutrition, technique refinement, and consistent development fully kick in, Bernard's ceiling could become enormous. Nobody is expecting immediate domination. This is still a long-term developmental process, but the raw ingredients are clearly there. The same excitement exists around Joshua Uweru as well. The Eagles seem to love the idea of pairing these international prospects together during the learning process, especially with Jordan Mailata helping guide them. And honestly, there may not be a better mentor in the entire NFL for players entering football from unconventional backgrounds. Mailata understands exactly what that transition feels like because he lived it himself. That connection could become critical during difficult moments. Because the reality is, both Bernard and Uweru are going to face a steep learning curve. Football at the NFL level is unbelievably complex, especially for players coming from outside traditional pipelines. There will be mistakes, frustrating moments, and adjustments, but the Eagles appear committed to giving them a support system capable of maximizing their chances of success. And that long-term thinking says a lot about where this organization is mentally right now. Philadelphia is not operating like a franchise focused only on surviving one season. They are aggressively building layers of talent everywhere. Veterans, young stars, developmental projects, front office depth, coaching continuity. Everything feels intentional. Even the front office promotions show that mentality. The Eagles elevated Adam Berry to assistant general manager because they clearly view him as an important long-term piece of the organization. At the same time, bringing Joe Douglas into a major personnel role adds another experienced football mind to an already respected executive group. For a team that lost multiple people in recent off seasons, replenishing leadership internally matters just as much as replenishing the roster itself. And then there's the schedule. Early projections currently place the Eagles with one of the easier schedules in the NFC East. And while projections never guarantee success, it does create an opportunity. If the Eagles start fast and the defense gels early, this team could build momentum very quickly heading into the heart of the season. There's also growing expectation that Philadelphia could be selected for an international game this year, possibly in London given the opponents on the schedule. That would add another massive spotlight moment for a team already attracting serious attention